Why does trauma affect some people and not others? Maybe you're wondering about this. You're wondering why the things that have happened in your life seem to keep you up at night, seem to affect you, and how come there are other people who have experienced other scary things or other traumatic events in their life, and they seem to be okay. We're going to be answering that today by talking about what trauma is, what it means for you and for your life, and how you recover and how you can actually heal and grow. The good news is that your mind is made to heal. There's a natural process that your mind is looking to enter into to help it repair and heal that memory so that you can move forward. So we're going to be talking about that today. Well, first, we're going to be talking about what trauma is. Then we're going to be talking about some of the common symptoms associated with it. And then I'm going to talk about the difference, the biggest difference that exists between people who recover from trauma and people who don't. Okay, so let's start with what trauma is. Trauma is this idea that there are scary things that happen to us, and that these scary things form a template in your mind, and that your mind uses this template almost like a stencil to lay over your current reality and your future to try to anticipate something similar happening again. So it's kind of like it takes a picture, right? And then it uses this picture wherever you go to try to help you avoid that situation happening again. This is a lot of the symptoms that you experience, right? So first of all, flashbacks, this idea that sometimes someone will say a word that's associated with the trauma you experienced, and it will pull up in your mind that memory again, right? So if it's a car crash and someone says car or forward focus or something like this, all of a sudden your anxiety's up, you start to flash back and experience the memory again. For other people, they don't experience the memory so viscerally. They can just have this heightened anxiety in those moments, like their heart starts beating fast and they can't calm down. Okay, so it's this flashback kind of experience. Something else that'll happen is hypervigilance or anxiety, where your body is always acting like there's a stressor on the horizon, something that's about to happen that it's trying to prepare for. And so it can warn us by keeping our anxiety high so that we're always prepared for something bad to happen. And this is really difficult. It makes it hard to sleep. It makes it hard to have relationships. It makes it hard to work. Sometimes people, because of the hypervigilance, people can feel like they have ADHD, where they feel like they can't focus and they wonder, oh, do I have a focusing problem? Do I have an attentional problem? And often when people have that experience, it can be tied back to this hyperarousal, hyper focus, this hypervigilance that happens with trauma. So this has to do, again, with your body always being ready to move. This can affect not just your muscles and your muscle tension, but it can also affect your digestion. So a lot of people with trauma will have IBS issues. It'll affect panic attacks having to do with your heart. So your heart starts to beat irregularly, and then your body gets freaked out that your heart's beating irregularly, and it heightens the signal again. And it's this upward spiral that can create a storm. This is another trauma response, right? It can affect our muscle tension in chronic muscle issues like muscle pain. This is where a lot of people come into therapy, and they might actually even come in first to like an ER or doctor's office and complain of chronic pain. And the doctor says there's actually nothing wrong with your body, but it's actually an emotional issue because of the way that our bodies are connected to our emotional state. We can have this chronic pain or tension that exists in our back or our knee or our shoulders or other places that our anxiety is being expressed. So all to say that there's hypervigilance going on. You can have nightmares where you at night re-experience the emotion or the themes of the trauma over and over again. Let me just pull back up my sheet here. And then also you can experience avoidance. Let's say there's these sets of triggers that you experience where you try to avoid things that will remind you of the incident. For some people, this is family gatherings, if they have like relational trauma. For other people, it's like a certain street on their road or where something scary happened, or it's a certain kind of event like a party or a certain person's house, or certain words can be triggers, and that person will start to try to avoid those situations. This can get really pernicious, where when we start to respond to trauma with avoidance, this starts to create what's called agoraphobic kind of behaviors, which means that we start to stay really close to the house. We don't want to get too far away from things that are comfortable. We're afraid we're going to have another panic attack, or that we're going to get anxious. We're going to have an IBS issue. We're going to start to stutter. We're going to have flashbacks. And so we stay close to home. And then your world starts to shut down. The thing is, once you stay close to home, it actually doesn't resolve the issue of the trauma. It actually just makes more things feel scary outside. So avoiding triggers isn't a helpful response, but it's something that we do when we're scared because it feels like the only thing we can do. So let's talk about a framework for thinking about trauma. Okay, why does trauma happen, right? Trauma isn't just a thing that is so scary that it passes some kind of universal threshold. For example, anybody who experiences a car crash will be traumatized, for example, or anybody who experiences a life-threatening illness will be traumatized. That's not how trauma works. The reason is something called an allostatic load. And there's a kind of a formula here. On one side of the formula, you have this stressful event. How threatening was the event itself, right? How life-threatening, let's say, was the event. On the other side, we want to think about how much support and capacity did that person have to cope and repair and come back to safety, right? So on one side, you have the stress of the situation. The other side, you have the support, right? And if there's an imbalance between these two things, that's where you get lots of chronic trauma, right? That's when you get somebody who has really intense PTSD. An analogy that you can think about is a dam, right? If you have a dam that's nice and strong and high, if there is a flood, if there's a big storm and it raises the water level, that dam can process all of that water safely, right? It puts it through a generator, it puts it back into the river down below, it can create power, it can hold the dam to create safety, right? There's all kinds of things the dam can do to mitigate the immediate overwhelm of all that water. But if you have a very low dam, let's say one that's made out of, recycled wood, it's made by somebody who's never made a dam before, right? There's holes in it. Any amount of water, even a small rain, will bulldoze through that dam and cause destruction. However, there's another situation where you have a nice high dam and it can hold lots of different levels of water and still be relatively okay. This is the idea of allostatic load. The amount of stress and trauma that you experience has a lot to do with the support available to you. Now, this dam has to do, in terms of what it actually looks like in our regular day-to-day lives, has to do with things like, your support system. How many close friends do you have? How many close family members do you have? Do you have secure attachment with these people? Are you able to express how you're doing? Really, are you able to express how you're feeling, even when you feel sad or scared or angry? How much internal support do you have? Meaning, how much have you had moments where you've been able to talk yourself through difficult situations? Let's say you've had a mentor or past relationships that have taught you how to work through difficult things, to tell yourself, hey, I can get through this. I've been through hard things before. I can go through hard things now, right? So that's kind of more your history of positive relationships and secure attachments that empower you today, right? So even if you don't have family or friend around you today, you might have a history of really strong experiences that have built that dam inside of you to have an internal capacity, right? But then you think about other supports like therapy, or you might think of medication or a strong job or income, right? These other things that help us cope and feel like the whole world isn't falling apart. When we have all those things in place, there's a lot that we can handle and be okay with. But again, if we don't have any of those things, almost everything will be traumatic. Any kind of offense or difficult thing that happens in our life, it will feel crushing to us. Most of us exist somewhere in the middle of the bell curve, right? We don't have completely secure relationships, but we have enough to where the daily things that happen in life don't overwhelm that dam. We can get through it. We can move through those experiences and be relatively okay. This is where it's so important to think about the difference. Again, remember that question that you first came in with. Why does trauma impact some people and not others? And the main difference that we see in research when we think about PTSD. Why do some people develop PTSD and some people don't? But also when we look at treatment outcomes, what happens when people receive more social support, build up that dam, right? And what happens when people don't? We see consistently with all that data that the main difference between why people are traumatized or not has to do with their support. It has to do with what they have available to them to come back to being okay. I want to take a minute to talk about this neurologically, about what happens in your brain. Okay, so when you have an overwhelming traumatic experience, it kind of exists initially over here in the right hemisphere. It has to do with this sense about what the memory was like for you, how you picture that. It's kind of like this dream-like state, and it can be really overwhelming, kind of chaotic. And something that you want to be able to do is bring it over here to the left hemisphere to where we create a causal string of relationships. And what that might sound like is this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then I felt this way, right? So I was driving in a car, I was going around this turn, somebody T-boned me, and my car flipped. The paramedics came, right? It was really scary. Paramedics came, I went to the hospital, right? You're creating a string logically, causally of what happened through the incident. When we can do that emotionally, when we can express our emotions and come to the point where we make sense of the experience, our mind doesn't have to avoid the situation anymore. It's kind of like the difference in the right hemisphere would be kind of like if you had beads or marbles scattered all over the ground and they're all moving, right? And anytime you walk through that room, you might slip on a marble, right? Which is kind of that trauma response that comes up. You might bump into the trauma all the time, right? Where it's always kind of bumping into you. You're always slipping around. It might be an experience when you really slip and fall, like a big flashback or a panic attack, right? When you're able to bring it over to this side of the mind, when you're able to make sense of it, sort through it emotionally and in safety, it's kind of like taking all those marbles and let's say putting them in a thread, right? Putting them on a string to where we can understand that, right? We can go forward and backwards. We can make sense of it. There's something about that process that actually cools our emotional mind down. It actually regulates our nervous system. It helps us feel safe. And the way that happens traditionally, whether it's through our internal capacities that have been built up over time or through our support system with other people, is that as we express emotionally the story, the other person, right, let's say a friend or a therapist or a spouse who can listen and hear those emotions, they tune in to those emotions with us. And as we get overwhelmed by them, the safe other person is able to reflect it back to us. Oh, so this happened. You felt so scared, right? You felt overwhelmed and depleted. No one was around, were they? Right? They give us that feedback. And as they calm down and help us see what happened inside, that's what helps us start making sense of that memory. Okay, so this is this natural process. And if you want to think about it like this, that initial trauma response that you have when you get overwhelmed or when there's a panic attack or when you're scared or when you feel alone, those emotional feelings coming up, they're not bad. They're actually a bid. It's this call for a safe container to place these emotions. It's a part of us wanting to bring it up so that it can be understood and heard by somebody safe, and that we can then make sense of it and not have to avoid it anymore. The reason I say that is because so often with trauma, all we want to do is we want to shove it down. We want to take deep breaths. We want to avoid the thing. We want to create a boundary. I don't want to go over there. I don't want to go over to their house. I don't want to think about it. And all that does is make our world smaller, and it doesn't reduce our trauma. It doesn't help us sleep better at night. But when we can understand that emotion, not as something that we need to suppress, but as something we need to express and say out loud to somebody in a safe context so that we can heal, so we can understand it, that is how we actually grow ourselves. That's how we grow our awareness. That's how we grow our capacity to heal and to experience hard things. And you'll see through that process that there's something that survives. There's something that recovers and helps us feel whole again. So I hope that helps you with discerning where you are with trauma. again, I say this to say that having trauma isn't about the event that happened to you. This is about how you have experienced support whenever anything scary has happened to you, how you've experienced support or not that has helped you to feel safe again. We have therapists in Pasadena and in Los Angeles who are specialized in helping walk people through that healing process so they can come back to themselves again. If that's you, please reach out. We have wonderful therapists who can connect with you, and we want to help you do that. All right. Thank you so much.